Good morning, everyone. I see that everyone is slowly trickling in, so we will extend our introduction a little bit just so that no one misses any of the juicy stuff in the middle. But just to introduce ourselves, my name is Jill Nogaris. I'm the English coordinator here at the Virginia Department of Education. I have a couple of colleagues here with me as well who will introduce themselves.
Good morning, my name is Carmen Keurig and I'm the elementary English reading specialist here at the department.
I'm Taylor Snow. I'm the English and History Social Science Specialist here at VDOE.
Good morning, I'm Christine Harris. I'm the Director of Humanities here at the agency.
And we do have a couple of panelists who we will introduce later on in our time together so that we can get through our part and get you straight to the experts. Just to let you know what this morning looks like. Okay, why can't I? One moment, technical difficulties on this end. Trying to advance slides. Well, I will work on sharing these slides with you. At the same time, let me tell you what we're going to do today. We are going to be looking at research best practices, give you some updates for our standards of learning, and then conclude with a panel discussion with some experts at the university level and in local school divisions. Let's see if I switch over if this will advance. Is it advancing? One moment, please. Aha. I think we are good now. Apologies for our technical difficulties. So as you can see, we have our welcome and introductions. We're looking at research. We're looking at state updates, and then we will have a panel discussion with Dr. Tammy Milby from the University of Richmond. She's the Director of Reading, and Lori Wall, the Director of Elementary Curriculum from Newport News Public Schools. You should have a chat feature available to you in the Zoom application. If you would like to pose questions to the group as we're discussing, we would ask that you use that feature, and if we can address these questions live, if time permits, we will certainly do that. Taylor will be monitoring that chat, and other questions we will just collect. It does collect a transcription of the entire chat, and we can put additional slides at the end of the presentation before it is posted for future use. So we will be able to add answers as necessary there. All right, we always like to start with our standards of accreditation and the Code of Virginia. Just to talk about best practices for elementary reading blocks, we really want to look at what the Code of Virginia says and just want to point out two specific areas. You'll see in B, in kindergarten through grade 3, reading, writing, spelling, and math should be the focus of the instructional program, which means that 680 hours of the required 990 hours of instructional time should be used on English, math, science, and history and social science, which allows many opportunities to bring literacy in through the available content areas. So there is a lot of flexibility there and a lot of support for encouraging literacy across content areas in kindergarten through grade 3. And just to emphasize that some more, we'll just send this out as like a highlight. The standards of learning shall include, but not be limited to, the basic skills of communication, including listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And the English standards of learning for reading in kindergarten through grade 3 shall be based on the components of effective reading instruction to include at a minimum phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary development, and text comprehension. So this, we just like to point back out, this gives us the underpinning, the guidance, the foundation for what our instructional program should include. We always like to be able to turn back to this to see that we are making the right decisions and that we are heading in the right direction, and that these are the components of our early literacy instructional blocks.
Okay, so we apologize for the echo, everyone. We were trying to switch mics over. We did want to share some resources that we have that are research-based resources that we have been sharing that do reinforce the pieces of the instructional program that Jill shared that come from the Code of Virginia. And the first one is the IES Practice Guide. The IES Practice Guide, these practice guides are published by What Works Clearinghouse and the Institute of Education Sciences. And these guides examine studies and make recommendations based on the evidence of these studies. And the recommendations are ranked in order of strongest evidence to most minimal to the minimal evidence. And they provide some specific teaching practices, not programs or anything that would need to be purchased, but some specific teaching practices that do address the recommendations that we share. So we're going to share these recommendations. We have two different practice guides that we'll be pulling from this morning. One is the Foundational Skills to Support Reading for Understanding in Kindergarten through 3rd grade, and then we'll touch on how that is followed up on when students get to 4th and 5th grade. And then there's another one on teaching elementary writing. So we'll be sharing recommendations for both of these that are important criteria when thinking about planning for an elementary literacy block. So both of these resources are linked at the end of this webinar. So when you receive the webinar, there will be access to these. So we will be sharing these today, but we do think it would be a good idea to go and examine those further when time allows. So the first recommendation in the Foundation Skills to Support Reading, kindergarten through 3rd grade, is teaching students academic language skills, including the use of inferential and narrative language and vocabulary knowledge. So supporting the development of these specific academic language, inferential language, narrative language skills will broaden students' listening comprehension skills, which will prepare them for better reading comprehension. Teaching students to speak in a narrative in a sequential way, supporting their speaking beyond the here and now during conversation and also about text. It will expand their vocabulary knowledge and their syntax within the English language. So it's always important when thinking about planning for a literacy block to include where are you including time for this support, for the scaffolds to develop this academic language. Recommendation 2 is develop the awareness of the segments of sound in speech and how they link to letters. That was a lot of words, but we're going to expand on that a little bit. So to effectively decode and encode words, students must be able to identify the individual sounds or phonemes that make up the words they hear in speech. So naming of the letters of the alphabet as they appear in print and identifying each letter's corresponding sound. And this recommendation further shares ways to support these skills and gives specific practices that can be done, such as teaching students to recognize and manipulate segments of sound in speech. That manipulation of sound is key to helping them decode and encode words in print. Teaching students letter-sound relationships and using word building and other activities to link to students' letter-sound knowledge relationships with phonemic awareness. So again, when reflecting back on where does this go into the elementary literacy block, planning for this. When you think about some of these things, they may not be new concepts, but reflect on the implementation of these concepts. Is this happening daily in the literacy block? Is this happening with fidelity? Recommendation number 3 says teach students to decode words, analyze word parts, and write and recognize words. This recommendation shares several ways to implement decoding and analyzing word parts. The first way is blending sounds with spelling patterns from left to right to produce a recognizable word. And then the next way that they are suggesting to accomplish this is to provide instruction in common sound spelling patterns. And again, thinking about the elementary literacy block. Is it explicit? Is it systematic? Is this happening daily? And then also continuing this instruction even as students move into learning syllables. So while often we think of this as maybe a K1 type skill, this should be seen up until 3rd grade when students, are they kind of learning how to decode multisyllable words even? Is that explicit? And then moving into 4th and 5th grade, are they receiving some explicit instruction on those meaningful word parts and the vocabulary that they need to continue this work? And then recommendation number 4 says, ensure that each student reads connected text every day to support reading accuracy, fluency, and comprehension. So this recommendation shares that students should be reading wide variety of connected text daily. That's something that we know in the reading world, with and without constructive feedback. They need to have that low risk environment, but they also need teacher feedback to grow as readers. So as students are beginning to apply the alphabetic principle, text should provide examples of recently taught spelling patterns with support and feedback from teachers on applying the decoding strategies learned. So thinking about text that you're choosing for instruction in the classroom every day. Does the text allow for students to be able to practice the skills and the decoding skills that they are learning? And this recommendation also shares just some good specific strategies for helping students become more fluent in this as well. So we will move to the next slide, which goes into now the reading practice, or the writing practice guide, excuse me. So teaching elementary school students to be effective writers. So again, we think this is just as valuable as the reading one. We know they go hand in hand to create readers and writers and communicators, and we don't want that to be forgotten in the elementary classroom. It's just as important. Writers are readers. So the recommendation 1 for this is probably the most important one: provide daily time for students to write. So this instructional practice guide recommends at least 30 minutes a day in kindergarten for teaching skills and strategies and processes for writing, as well as it goes up to an hour a day for older elementary students. So they're thinking 30 minutes of that for instruction and 30 minutes of that would be for student writing. So just thinking about that. I know everybody's schedules work a little differently, but where you can, reflect on some implementation of that. It also suggests that some of the student writing time could occur with other content domains, such as possibly writing a lab report for science is one of the examples that it provides. So providing that time. Is there that sacred time every day, daily, for students to write? Recommendation 2 says teach students to use the writing process for a variety of purposes. So this particular recommendation shares many strategies for engaging students within the writing process, thinking of specific strategies of helping students pick ideas and organize their writing, all the way to some strategies for publishing for different purposes and writing for a variety of audiences. So just reflecting on in your current literacy block, where are these strategies specifically taught, and are they, and maybe which ones do we need to add to, which ones are we doing well? And then recommendation number 3, teach students to become fluent with handwriting, spelling, sentence construction, typing, and word processing. It's kind of a big one. There's a lot lumped into that recommendation. But when we think about when young students begin to write, they will scribble. They will scribble and they will tell you a whole story for what that scribble means. They have learned that what I think or what I write stands for what I think. They've learned that symbolic relationship. And then as they get older and they're beginning to continue to express those ideas on paper, as well as use their developing spelling knowledge to identify the sounds they need to express those ideas, they have 2 hard active jobs as writers. And if students have not developed fluency with their letter formation, then the ideas they want to express will change and they will adapt based on what they know about phonics and what they know about their spelling patterns. And with their print no longer acts as that symbol for their ideas. So handwriting is not only essential for letter learning, but fluency with this is essential for expressing those ideas. And as students grow and begin to express their ideas in a variety of modes, these practices need to be implemented daily. So just thinking about all the different modes that we use in the world to communicate, and our students becoming more fluently as they get older in their elementary career. So thinking about word processing, where might be a place for that in the literacy block? Utilizing technology for communication, where some opportunities lie in the reading portion or writing portion of your elementary literacy block. And it's important that this is intentional and ongoing, and not just as time allows in our day. So then recommendation number 4 for writers is creating an engaged community of writers. This recommendation in this practice guide is actually the one that shows the most minimal evidence, but we know that having a strong community in the classroom is crucial to the student learning that will occur. So just thinking about this with the community, if students are safe to express their ideas, then their ideas are going to be truly the ideas that they're thinking and wanting to express. And if they're not safe in this community, they will begin to adapt, just like we were talking about with the handwriting piece. This recommendation shares some specific ways, such as the teacher acting as a writer, our teachers sharing their writing with students, showing that vulnerable side that writing is a process and that it can be revised, providing choices where opportunity allows for students to choose a topic, materials, place in the classroom to write, lots of different opportunities for choices. And then for students to collaborate with each other as writers. Are they providing feedback? Do they respect each other as a community of writers? And then just presenting effective ways to publish student writings and providing that ongoing continuous feedback through writing conferences. So we're going to dive. So those recommendations come from the What Works Clearinghouse and the Institute on Education Sciences. We're going to dive a little deeper now into some phonics resources that we are sharing. So if you've seen, the International Literacy Association has recently published a literacy leadership brief on meeting the challenges of early literacy with phonics instruction. So we want to share some of the very specific ways that this brief describes effective phonics instruction and what effective phonics instruction looks like. So we have a couple quotes from that brief on your slide right now. So I won't read those aloud to you, but they are there. And this brief is also linked at the back of our web, or at one of the very last slides of the webinar for you to kind of go and look at yourself. But there are some very specific characteristics of what strong phonics instruction looks like. So again, when you think about this, reflecting either in your classroom, in your school, in your division, are these characteristics present? Are they ongoing? Are they happening daily, weekly, even if whatever the case may be? But just thinking about that, reflecting on these practices as you're listening and hearing today. So the first characteristic of strong phonics instruction that this brief shares is that it is explicit and is it systematic. So explicit meaning that the letter-sound relationship or skill is directly stated to students. So we directly say the S sound is represented by the letter S. So we're explicit about the instruction. Systematic means that the instruction follows a continuum that moves from easier to more complex skills. So I think be thinking about a student's year. So in the kindergarten year, in the first grade year, is it moving from easier to more complex? And then across their elementary career, so from kindergarten to third grade, kindergarten to fifth grade, is this moving in a systematic direction? The next one is readiness skills. Some strong readiness skills are probably the biggest predictor of early reading success. So thinking about strong alphabet recognition and phonemic awareness are needed for success in reading. Knowing the names and sounds of letters with fluency and being able to orally blend, segment, and manipulate sounds and words from kindergarten, moving up to grade 3, even in those multisyllabic words, that blending and segmenting still needs to be systematic, will be the biggest predictor of their early reading success. And this does echo some of what we heard from those practice guides as well. The next one is scope and sequence. So having a strong scope and sequence in phonics instruction will move from easier to more complex skills and build on previous learning. So again, thinking about across the elementary career, kindergarten, moving into those multisyllabic words. Do students have a scope and sequence of how they learn that? And then moving into the meaningful parts of words and that vocabulary learning. Do they have a strong scope and sequence for that? The next one is blending. We teach students to segment sounds in order to decode words, but that phonic blending, putting those sounds back together in order to recognize the word, students must be proficient with blending orally before using it in text. And blending is used with early readers, but again, should continue as students transition into multisyllabic words. The next one is dictation. Students must be provided opportunities to try out what they're learning with their phonics skills with teacher support. So just like in that IES practice guide where they talked about connected text, they have to be able to try it out. The same applies with the spelling of those phonics skills as well. They have to be able to try it out in a safe way with teacher feedback. The next one is word awareness. So thinking about your literacy block. Literacy blocks should consist of opportunities for students to analyze and notice patterns in words through tasks that require students to manipulate words to increase their ability to notice those larger chunks in monosyllabic words and multisyllabic words. Word building and word sorting are two examples that the literacy leadership brief provides of these tasks. So again, reflecting on that implementation, do you see word building, or are you word building weekly with students as they are learning some of those phonics tasks? High frequency words, which are known as the most common words in English, that those are explicitly taught. So words that follow a regular sound spelling relationship can be learned through that regular phonics instruction, but then words that do not should be explicitly taught to students and connected back to the sounds that the print is making. And then reading connected text. Again, this is another echo from the practice guide that we discussed earlier. So students should have opportunities to practice and apply their phonics instruction within decodable text, within text that reflects those skills that they are learning. And the last one is, the last but not least, building vocabulary and background knowledge. As younger elementary students need this just as much as the older elementary students. Thinking about younger students when they're learning to decode, if they have a background and experience with that word, they immediately have something to connect it to. And thinking about older elementary students, those 4th and 5th graders, as they begin to encounter more complex text and vocabulary, providing a balance of phonics, vocabulary instruction with best practices on language acquisition and expanding their background knowledge is essential to their comprehension and their communication skills as they grow. So just be thinking about these resources as you're reflecting and kind of taking inventory of your current literacy block and thinking about, do you see these happening? Are they explicit? Are they systematic? Are they daily, weekly, as needed? So Jill is going to share a little bit about the current English standards and just some criteria to think about in literacy blocks as well.
Thank you, Carmen. Yes, and we're hoping that a lot of what you've heard today is reaffirming for what's happening in your schools. But again, really stopping and thinking about how effective your literacy block is. And while you might be hitting these components, are you hitting them in such a way that you're seeing the results you're looking for? Or do we need to be more intentional and systematic about our approach? And I think you'll love hearing what our panelists have to say about how this might look, because we are taking you through the instructional side of things, and then they're going to show you how to put some of this in practice. So we just kind of wanted to spend a few minutes talking about some of the Virginia Department of Education resources and kind of how our materials align with research. Just wanted to point out that with our new 2017 Standards of Learning, you'll see that we have updated the standards and some of the teacher notes and the curriculum frameworks that also echo what you see, what you've heard earlier today. So as many of you have probably noticed, that K3 former oral language strand is now named Communication and Multimodal Literacies, and that is to align with grades 4 and 5, because an effective literacy block should be integrating these skills such as retelling, asking questions, and collaborating throughout the literacy block as modes to communicate about reading and writing unless specific intervention is needed and is being done. So you can kind of see just the focus of that communication multimodal literacy strand there. And again, you can see that we're looking at integrating multiple modes of communication because we know that reading is not an isolated event. We work on reading and speaking and listening and writing together for everything to make meaning for students. So we're encouraging options of multimodal literacies for students so they can see how these things work together and the technology that they come in contact with every day, how all of that works together to create meaning. And then obviously we're working on expanding our collaboration and consensus building and working towards common goals that kind of goes with our Virginia 5 C's. Something that we just really want to point out, one important change to note is that several of those oral early literacy skills that were in that oral language strand were actually moved from that strand and put into the reading strand. As many communication skills often get integrated into other areas, and often explicit instruction in these oral early literacy skills is not present. So this change would allow for more time for explicit instruction in these critical areas. So move them into reading where there would be a stronger focus because you would see that in the reading block. It's not one of the soft skills that is kind of ongoing in the background, but because we are looking specifically at early literacy and that early oral literacy, that really is part of reading. Oral literacy is part of beginning reading. So we moved that over to the reading strand intentionally so that greater emphasis would be there for students. We also added in our 2017 English Standards of Learning Curriculum Framework some teacher notes that should help you focus your literacy block. I'm just going to point out some from kindergarten and first grade on the reading strand, and there are more than one bullet point for teacher notes. I've just moved one over to kind of show you on the introduction strand, and this is important because I know a lot of people, this is a very long document, it's close to 300 pages, so a lot of people hit Control Find to get to the page that they are looking for, but as a result, you miss a lot of these nuggets that we've put on the introduction page for each strand. So if you are looking, just to kind of show another place where we are echoing research best practice, if you go to the introduction strand for reading in kindergarten, you will see in the teacher notes, the first one is teachers should teach the concepts of print, basic phonetic principles, comprehension of stories, and letter identification skills through systematic direct instruction, individual and small group activities, and time spent exploring and reading books and other print material, which echoes everything that Carmen shared with us earlier. So just note, again, this is just one of the teacher notes there, but we put a lot of best practices there to support your instruction and even ways that you could integrate and tie things together. So that is just one example. And if you were to look at first grade, you'll see some recommendations to be included in the literacy block, such as systematic, explicit, and direct instruction during small group time, including time for independent reading and student choice within the literacy block, reading aloud to model strategies, and time for students to apply strategies in text. Grades 4 through 5 also contain recommendations such as reading longer and more complex texts along with student choice. So this would be something to consider when structuring your literacy block as well. So hopefully you've been able to hear some patterns and threads that you're thinking about as you reflect on your literacy blocks. But now we are going to talk to our two panel experts who have been doing some work in these areas, and their perspectives are valuable as they drive this work in their current roles. So the first person that we are going to speak with is Dr. Tammy Milby from the University of Richmond, and she is going to be switching over to share her screen in a minute. So I just want you to see, these are the 5 questions that she will be addressing during her part of the panel discussion. What are the essentials to an elementary literacy block? What does differentiated instruction look like? What are the students and teacher doing during this time? In what ways have you worked to incorporate the recommendations from the IES practice guides into your work with prospective teachers? Describe what the reading writing connection should look like within an elementary literacy block. And then she'll leave us with what is one piece of advice that you can provide for a new teacher who might be structuring a literacy block on their own for the first time. So please bear with us as this might take a technological shift here. We're not exactly sure, but one moment and she will share her screen.
Greetings from University of Richmond. This is Tammy Milby. I'm looking forward to chatting with you today. So right now I'm going to try to switch my screen over. All right, I'm here. Are people able to hear me? I'm here. Are you all able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Tammy.
Okay, great. And I've shared my screen. Is it up?
Yes, we see your screen.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to start off with the essentials to the elementary literacy block and some reading and writing connections. So the first consideration is just to think about what we really value and really what's most important with our learners and make sure that our time is matching that. So we can spend as much time as possible on relevant academic tasks. We know that in classrooms things come up all the time, but if we can really think about the precious moments that we have for literacy and really keeping our focus academic and thinking about what other kinds of things are happening in the classroom that might be stealing away moments from reading and how can we embed literacy into those moments. So for example, if we have a time when we're having, restroom breaks or transition, could we be reading aloud a chapter book or novel for students during that time? Okay, the second thing to think about is real reading and real writing. Sometimes when I visit classrooms, there's a lot of stuff happening during the language arts block, but kids are not really engaged with reading and writing and doing real work with text and real work with writing. So if we can embed that, that's super helpful.
Hey, Tammy, I don't want to interrupt you. We're having a little trouble hearing. Would you mind, I know it's hard to yell and present all at the same time. Would you mind speaking up just a little bit?
Sure. Okay, so real writing, real reading was the point that I just left off on, and just as many opportunities as possible for children to really work with text. The third point, as much as possible, we can integrate reading and writing across the SOL areas, but also the content areas. So, for example, we can start a social studies lesson with the text and then have kids read something about that and write about it while we're teaching that content as well. And then the last point on this particular slide is just aim for more of what you desire. We want to have as many minutes per day focused on literacy as possible. In the primary grades, it's great if we can have 120 minutes or more focused on literacy. In the upper grades, 90 minutes. That's particularly helpful because we know a lot of research about volume says the more kids read and write, the better they get at it. So if we can protect the minutes for reading and writing, that really will help readers become more proficient. Okay, the next thing to think about is just physical space. And so how does the classroom arrangement support literacy? Is there print around the room, and is that print particularly meaningful to students and the learning tasks that they've been accomplishing? Does the classroom include some choice opportunities for students to move to centers or stations that are literacy focused? Are there words that they've been working on, maybe those high frequency words that Carmen talked about? Are they available and are they at eye level? Are teachers using visuals and anchor charts? Are those created with the learners and are they accessible to children in the classroom? And are there spaces appropriate for lessons to happen, but also independent work and opportunities around that space for students' work to be published? Okay, next slide is related to access to literature. And so we want to really think about using high quality literature, thinking about diverse, always think about fiction and using fiction quite often, but if we can think about informational text as well as other kinds of print, things like magazines, newspapers, source documents, pamphlets, references, just any real text that we can be working with to get students to really think critically and use their comprehension strategies. We want to have more minutes of real reading to raise achievement. And I really like for whole group a focus on interactive read alouds, where the teacher is working with the text and really thinking aloud to promote comprehension. My next focus on building sort of the block effectively is to think about what the instruction looks like. There can be a balance between whole class, small group, and independent reading, sort of an ebb and flow that happens between these different areas. In whole class, we can think about building a literacy community and then really focusing on strategies as much as possible. In small group, and independent reading times, we can really think about students' individual needs and differences, how we can provide them extra help, and then what does our data say about how we form different groups. And we also want to think about an appropriate level of challenge.
Hey, Tammy, I'm sorry to interrupt you again. Would you mind maybe repeating that slide? We were unable to hear. There was no sound for that slide. It seemed to be getting better, but then we didn't hear anything.
Certainly. Back to the instruction slide. Start again.
Yes, please.
Okay. So we want to really think about the ebb and flow of the classroom and balancing time between whole group, small group, and independent reading, and having a combination of different formats in the classroom. During the whole group time, we want to talk about building community as well as a strategy focus and using a variety of strategies. During the small group and independent reading time, we really want to think about how can we provide for kids' individual differences, what extra help do learners need, and how are we using data to sort of form and change groups as time goes along. Also, intervention, we want to think about an appropriate level of challenge to keep readers moving, and think about the people in your building who are resources. How are they supporting learners? Sometimes I see people in schools doing just too many groups, so there's not a lot of effective things happening within those groups. So maybe the most skilled people, the teacher, the reading specialist, could be working with really kids that struggle, but then also your high achieving students as well. But also coaching to support teachers who may need some additional help with strategies. Okay, I'm going to move along to the next part of the block that you might want to think about, which is just motivation. I think sometimes we get so focused on the other parts of reading, we forget how strong and significant the impact of motivation can be on learners and the affective domain, and how we can build engagement with kids. So having those high expectations, thinking about the tasks that we're asking students to do. Is that learning task worthwhile? Is it interesting for our learners? Does it provide them some type of challenge? Are kids being given an opportunity to work collaboratively? Is cooperation encouraged? Are we using some hands-on manipulatives and other ways for kids to learn? And we have some routines and procedures in place that allow small groups and other things to be able to happen in the classroom. So clearly there's a connection between reading and writing, and it's a very important connection. We want students to write about the text that they're reading. So We sometimes think about reading and writing being separate, but as much as possible, if we can combine, if we read about a text, it would be really helpful if students could write about a text, or if the teacher could use that text then for a mini lesson for the writer's block. When students write about what they're reading, they think critically and they try out the mini lessons that the teacher is giving them. We want to increase the amount of time that we have student-generated writing happening in the classroom. And in writing, teachers should write for students and model explicitly the writing strategies that we want learners to use. Now to the next question number 3, which was about the advice to beginning or new teachers. And I just say a lot that my largest piece of advice is to start with a piece of literature and to really think aloud for those comprehension strategies and really model thinking for students. The more you do that, the more your students will emulate that learning and be even more successful. And I know it said one tip, but a good teacher can never just do one. So I also say don't forget about building that clear relationship with the learners in your classroom, getting to know them. When you do, I think that just facilitates learning even further. The next question was related to how can we differentiate in the classroom and what does that look like practically? So we're going to think about the needs of all of our learners. And then think about how we can use a variety of literature and groups in sort of different ways. I really like an upfront or proactive approach to differentiation, kind of that universal design for learning, where I create a lesson and then I say, what can I do to kind of think about the learners in my own classroom? How could I engage them in a different way? Could I give them some choice to learn this lesson? Could I change out and maybe use different texts or different versions of text? Could the task be more authentic or hands-on? Could I teach this content in a different way? So I think sometimes when I'm thinking about English language learners and I embed a photograph or a piece of regalia or real life something into the lesson, it helps that English language learner, but then it helps all of the children in the classroom to have a visual, to see something hands-on. So some of the time, it's not starting with the lesson and breaking it apart. It's thinking about what can I do up front to really think about the learners in my classroom and to build things in that I know will help support learning for everyone. And then the last question was related to research into practice. And so we heard a lot from the ILA phonics guide as well as the IES guide on recommendations. And I really liked recommendation number 4, specifically about how fluency can really help to make the phonics that we've been working on explicitly and the comprehension strategies we're trying to get kids to kind of connect together. And so when we do a lot of work with fluency specifically and having kids reread text, it can build their confidence, it can build their automaticity, and it really helps to scaffold them up to a higher level of achievement. Some ways that we do that at University of Richmond with the kids that we're working with in classrooms, we do lots of choral and echo read where the kids read with our voices, or I read a line with fluency and they echo after my voice. Lots of repeated text reads, and sometimes we do silly voices or phrases to help them see the power of that fluency. And we also do lots of work with readers theater, where we take stories that we've read, turn them into scripts, and have kids reread them to practice for performance. But that's rereading, and it gets kids to do it in an authentic and valuable way.
Thank you, Tammy, for providing the valuable tips. We do apologize for the technical difficulties that we were having while we listened, but Tammy did post some good questions on a lot of those slides just to think about the community and the environment and what we're surrounding kids with and all of those things. So please go back and take a look at her slides and think about those questions and reflect on those. And if you have any specific questions about any of her slides, please feel free to let us know and we can make contact with Tammy to get that information for you. So thank you, Dr. Milby, for being one of our higher education panelists this morning. Our next panelist is Lori Wall. She's the Director of Elementary Curriculum for Newport News Public Schools. She has, they've been on a journey to kind of do some work in their literacy blocks as well. So we invited her to share just a little bit about that journey, and hopefully you'll take some nuggets that you can use back in your school divisions as you continue your journey as well. So Lori, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Are you there?
Can you hear me? Okay. I see a yes from Dawn and a yes from Sarah. I think a lot of feedback. So Tammy, you might need to mute, and Carmen, you might need to mute.
There we go. She's talking.
Oh, you're there?
I think Tammy and Carmen might need to mute so that it's not going back and forth.
Okay, I will ask the first question, and then I'll let Lori speak. So Lori, can you talk a little bit about the journey that you all are on and the essentials to the elementary level?
Sure. I'm excited to kind of share our journey of where we are. We have a long way to go in Newport News, but our teachers have jumped on board, and we did some reflection about our literacy block, really looked at our data and our data trends over the last few years, especially with our PALS data. We took a look at our practices, and then we started reading a lot of the research out there. And so that's sort of how we started our journey of kind of looking at our current literacy block. And so what you spoke about earlier, Carmen, about the 5 components of effective reading instruction, the 4 skills of communication, we really began to look at our curriculum to say, do we have those components? And overwhelmingly, we could say yes, but the intentionality of what you spoke about earlier about explicit and direct instruction, we were saying maybe not so much. And so I'll speak to that a little bit later about how we've taken those 2 pieces and made a little bit more, some strides in that area, as well as the integration across the day with new science standards that are coming into play, social studies standards that were coming into play. We wanted to have more intentionality around the integration across the day and not just in the literacy block. And then you spoke to the research with choice and voice, and we really wanted our kids to have opportunity to respond and read and write of things that were interesting to them and be able to share that with an audience that they could express their ideas to. And then the idea of real world experiences. So those were really the big 5 that we've been looking at in terms of how to structure our day.
Okay, question 2. In what ways have you all worked to incorporate the recommendation from the practice guides into the elementary?
So I think this is where we've made the most strides in the last 2 years, and especially in grades K through 2. And I just take my hats off to our grade K 1 and 2 teachers, because there have been some major changes that we have considered around explicit teaching. And so we've really moved from a meaning approach, which is more of a literature emphasis in grades K2, to a code emphasis or more of a phonics-based approach. And that comes with some shifts when you look at that philosophy of more explicit the scope and sequence of explicit instruction of phonics and word reading skills. And so one of the pieces we've added this year is what we call the PPAC. That's what our teachers call it. And it's really the phonological and phonemic awareness curriculum in kindergarten and 1st grade. And we looked at the work of Dr. Hegarty, who has phonemic awareness curriculum, and we began to write our own curriculum based off of some of the work we were reading using the standards of learning. So every day our kindergarten and 1st grade teachers have a daily routine across our district with explicit phonemic awareness and phonics instruction and whole group. And that continues into small group as well for our emergent beginning learners based on where they are on that continuum, and that's built into the small group instruction. Another piece that speaks to that systematic approach is that we really went back and looked at the explicit handwriting instruction and how we incorporate that into when we're learning our letters and sounds, and giving that explicit handwriting instruction so that students have the fluency of writing when they're connecting that alphabetic knowledge and the alphabetic principle together, that they know the strokes, and that we know that brain research tells us that it connects to the brain. And so we've done a lot of work around the integration of handwriting instruction and being very explicit and systematics, as well as moving from an inductive, more of a, we'll present it and then we'll do some inquiry around the spelling patterns, and then we'll name them after. We've moved more to an explicit and systematic phonics and spelling scope and sequence. And so that's probably been one of the biggest shifts that we've had, is we really followed a spelling scope and sequence with the work we had studied for many, many years around word journeys and words their way. And we began to look at our data and realize that our reading data, kids were getting spelling patterns, but they weren't necessarily seeing them in reading early enough, and they weren't being able to blend and segment, blending and segmenting those same words in the application of text. And so we've gone on a journey of revising our scope and sequence to a phonics scope and sequence. And with that phonics scope and sequence comes the idea of explicitly introducing that pattern to kids and using word building activities, word lists, decodable text, dictation. So our small group instruction diet, while we still follow the developmental stages of reading, what we provide in that diet of instruction is much more laser-like, and we are seeing the differences in our kids with the explicit teaching. Then you spoke to the research of writing, and we've had a writer's workshop model for a long time, and really getting kids to own what their topic is and what they want to write about, and having purpose and audience. But we also have added an element this year of low risk writing, and that's where we've really taken a look at where are other ways in real world applications. So during the literacy block, if we're over and we have the kitchen that I am the person who's taking your order, and you are the people who have come in to the restaurant, and so I am taking your order and I'm giving you a bill and you're reading the menu, and so giving them opportunities to write outside the process writing model are just a few of the ways I think we are responding to the researches that you shared earlier.
Wonderful. And so the next question is, what does differentiated instruction look like? Can you describe some of the students' daily routine?
So I really put 4 big pieces that we're kind of tackling with differentiation instruction. And that's understanding and using a balanced assessment approach, really when to use diagnostic, formative, and summative, and how you use all of that data to drive differentiated instruction. So we've really been looking at what are our diagnostic measures we are using, what are our formative assessment measures we're using, and what are our summative. And so I would encourage districts to take a look at that balance Want me to go on to the next one, Carl? I think you're.
Sorry, we were having a little technical
Okay.
difficulty
Okay.
again. So
Okay.
the next question is, can you describe a little bit about the reading-writing connection and how that's been incorporated into daily experiences?
Sure. I really feel like I'm just giving you some of the pieces that our teachers have been working on, and these were the highlights that I was thinking about. So the reciprocity between our reading and writing units of study, I think, has been a critical part that we shifted to several years ago, studying the work of Lester Laminack of flipping reading into writing. We spent a lot of time with him in our district, looking at the integration of if you can infer something, how do you apply that in writing? When you're teaching visualizing in reading, how do you turn that into then, how do you use that then to show that show, don't tell in writing? So we spent a lot of time on the reciprocity of our reading and writing units. We've talked about the use of the reader response journal, and we've been studying the work of Jennifer Saravello and her work understanding text and readers, her work around reading conferences and writing conferences, so that students are responding to what they're reading, but in a multitude of ways with in the use of technology, literature circles, and book clubs, again, integrating both processes. Lisa said we've lost all sound now. Lisa, can you hear me now, Lisa? Oh, Catherine says she can still hear. Okay, I'm going to keep going because all of you are saying you can still hear. Okay. The other piece, if you look, the fourth idea is this idea of celebrations and presentations at the end of each of the writing units. We encourage teachers to set at the beginning of the unit a time for celebration or presentation so that they're writing for real audience and purpose, and that they can celebrate with whatever audience they need to share, so that they're writing for real purposes. And I think that has really motivated students, and teachers have come up with some really creative ways to celebrate and to have different ways for students to present, teaching them different technology tools to use as well. They have been very creative. The other piece are performance assessments across our content areas, integrate reading and writing, and our teachers have embraced the idea of the use of technology. And those are just a few of the pieces that we use, and they collaborate with our technology coaches on the use of those tools.
Thank you very much. And so lastly, can you just share maybe a few nuggets of suggestions for divisions who may be thinking about reworking their literacy blocks, or who may just need a next step in this work?
Sure. So I thought about 3 ideas that to offer you as advice that we've taken. So I wouldn't want to offer advice that we haven't done ourselves. And so the first would be to analyze your data. The second would be do your research and audit your practices. And we do a lot of reading and studying and talking to our teachers about what's working, what's not working. They're very good about sharing with us, what should we be reading now? This is working in our classroom, this isn't working. And so about 3 years ago, we started with David Kilpatrick's work, and I put that book over there on the left-hand side. That is where we started, began talking about orthographic mapping and the brain science of that explicit teaching. I would recommend that book, and then began to look at Louisa Moats' work, Marianne Wolf's work, and then we had the opportunity in our district to have the VDOE offered letters training, which is professional development, and it really supports. We began looking at the simple view of reading, revisiting Scarborough's reading rope, and then the 2 on the very far right side are what we're exploring right now, Sharon Walpole and Michael McKenna, we spend a lot of time in their work many years ago and revisiting their work around explicit instruction. So again, I just wanted to give you, as district leaders, these are books for teachers and district leaders to have conversation around, and then to decide based on what you're reading in your research to audit your practices and look at your data around what you need to change. And so the video, I'm gonna let the video answer that question, but there you can do letters training as well on your own. It is a professional learning model through Voyager, and so we are exploring having that opportunity for our teachers. It really does give the groundwork around the research of the explicit teaching that we've been talking about today. So that's just a little bit of our journey in Newport News. The teachers have been on board, and I really feel like they are the champions of this work. So I was honored to represent them today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing just your journey. Everybody's on their own journey. So we hope everybody was able to take, a nugget from today and kind of think about their own literacy block. So one of the things that we wanted to share was just a sample literacy block, if that's something that a nugget you need today. So again, this is just a sample literacy block with some of the actions that might be happening at that time. Literacy blocks may look different based on the time built into your master schedules, but the components that are happening within the literacy blocks are really the critical piece. So this sample one just talks about, whole group reading focused lesson, differentiated instruction, a whole group writing focused lesson, independent writing and conferring, and then kind of bringing a closure to the lesson, sharing and reflecting on the learning that we've done, the writing that we're working on, the books that we're reading. And then some of the pieces that we spoke about today are the actions that are kind of in that middle column, such as independent reading, writing in response to reading, conferring, handwriting, a lot of those things, and you all can kind of look through that and see. Again, it's just a sample. And then across the side, you can see student choice, research, communication as something that's embedded not only throughout the literacy block, but throughout the day. So just thinking about that as you move forward. Literacy blocks, again, won't look the same depending on your time. For younger students, you may have your whole group section broken up into, we do a little small group and then we come back and do a little bit more whole group. Literacy blocks for older students may have some independent reading time so that I as a teacher can confer, but then also some differentiated instruction time. So again, just depending on the work you're doing in your division, just a sample to help.
Okay, and we are wrapping this up. We do want to share the links to our professional research that we cited throughout this webinar. Those will be available with the slides when they are posted. I will say many of you know now that we have a comprehensive literacy webinar series that will be happening in January and February. And the page that you go to register for each of those will house all of the webinars when they are done. So it'll house a one-page summary. It'll include a link to our slide deck and then a YouTube recording of the webinars. And we greatly appreciate you working through our technology difficulties today. We are working with people who are not in the room with us and across the state and figuring out how to use Zoom as we just got it in our office ourselves. So we appreciate your patience and flexibility with us, and we certainly have learned a lot about technology through today's webinar. So we hope you learned about literacy and we learned about Zoom. But I just want to thank you all for taking your time with us this morning, and I want to leave you with our contact information at the end. Again, we hope that a lot of this was reaffirming for you, but that we also hope that it provides an opportunity for you to really dig in and audit your practices and think about, are you getting the results you're looking for, and what about those practices need to be tweaked. We've provided some research for you to go back and look at, some best practices, and just time for you to follow up with your divisions. We realize that this first YouTube webinar will be slightly wonky, but we do hope that you use it with departments and with teachers It's kind of a way to reflect on your practices and think about the future. So thank you so much for sharing your morning with us. Thank you to Dr. Milby and Lori Wall for being our panelists, and we look forward to offering another 10 different webinars later in the winter. So thank you for sharing your time with us. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.